Well, hello, good evening, everybody. Delighted to be networking back in person again. Thank you all very much for coming along. I hope you're going to have a very enjoyable evening. I'd like to first start off with thanking Mark and RSM for very kindly and generously hosting us yet again here in this lovely office with a fabulous view. Those of us who were here early caught a bit of the sunset, which was very nice. And to thank, of course, the old Members Office team, that's Christine and Catherine, who are with us tonight, for all their support behind the scenes and tonight as well. So thank you very much for that. Most importantly, we're here for our event. It's about changing paths, and we're delighted and really very grateful to have Francine, who's sitting in a hotel room in Nice, joining us, Joanne, who's putted it down from Ayrshire in Scotland to join us, and Catherine, who's run out of a conference to join us this evening. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing their stories, and I'm sure you will enjoy them too. And final thanks to Laurianne, who's kindly agreed to chair the session for us. So without further ado, I will pass you over to Laurianne.
Yeah, so hi everyone. So really happy to be with you all today. As you know, the topic of the talk is changing paths, experiences of different career journeys. We have three amazing speakers who will talk about their careers and, of course, answer questions. But I think probably the best thing to do now is for them to introduce themselves. So to begin with, we have Katherine Irving, and I'll let you talk about your experiences.
Laurianne, well, thanks for asking me to talk about my somewhat meandering career. This starts in the top left-hand corner. My parents met as doctors in Newcastle in the 60s and very soon afterwards got married and immediately took a boat to Australia. And I was born in Sydney 9 months, 6 days after that. After my dad finished his year's research, they returned to the UK and had a few more kids and moved around the country a bit and settled in Bolton. Bolton was not a particularly exciting place to be in the 70s. The major claim to fame was Fred Dibner, the steeplejack. It's a bit of a come down from Sydney. But I was brought up in a very academic and obviously very medical family, and went to academic school. And there's no question that I would be going to university, and I always thought I'd be doing medicine. But I had second thoughts when it came to applying to university. I wondered about doing psychology, not that I knew anything about it at all. And my dad said, oh, I don't think that's a very academic subject, so I think that idea. And then a teacher said, well, have you thought of applying to Oxford? And I didn't know anything about Oxford. I didn't know anyone who had gone to Oxford. But she said, well, I think if you apply for maths or chemistry, you should get a place. But medicine's much more competitive. So that finished it for me, and I applied for chemistry and the place at Queen's. And I'm afraid I wasn't a very committed student. I was always wishing that I'd done medicine, and I didn't really apply myself to chemistry. I remember being in the library on a rare visit and seeing this book by Oliver Sacks called Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, and reading that, how interesting that was compared with chemistry. It's all about brains that have gone wrong. And then in my final year, I did a research project on the effects of, much more biological focus, on the effects of deep sea diving on the nervous system. Unfortunately, that involved rats and toads, but that's another story. So I then, after completing my degree, I had another choice of what to do. I just really didn't know what to do at all. So I said to people I was going to go travelling, go back to my roots in Australia. Eventually, I told so many people I had to do it. And I went to work at my cousin's accountancy firm in London, just to earn some money in the admin role. Did that for a few months, and then went travelling. I decided I'd look up something to come back to. I quite liked accountancy, I quite liked the people I was working with, so I thought quite a good idea to earn and learn. So I lined up the job with Groups at my grad. And I did that for 2 years, and I quite enjoyed it. But it didn't really hold any meaning for me, and I still regretted. Thought, well, maybe I should have done medicine, and eventually thought I'm going to spend my life thinking I should have done medicine, and that I had to do it. So I met with a couple of people who had changed and gone back to university to do medicine as well. it seemed quite a big thing to do, even though looking back on it, I was very young still. But at the age of that age, it still felt a big deal to go back to university. But I went to UCL and Manchester, and after 5 years, I qualified as a doctor. And after a year, I moved down to London and worked. I was essentially changing jobs every few months, changing hospitals, changing specialities. I've worked in most of the hospitals in London, I think. And then I had the decision about whether to train in general practice or to stay in hospital medicine. And I chose one of the harder routes, I think, which was to train in general medicine and rheumatology, and spent many years, sleepless nights, and eventually, after 12 years, qualified as a consultant rheumatologist and have settled at King's for the past few years. But over this time, when I was in London, from the late 90s, I met a lot of people through the Big Chill Festival involved in music and arts, and I started wondering what life was like, really, because they seem to have much better time than me. And I think I kind of envied their lifestyle quite a bit. And I also started practicing yoga, and that led to meditation. And then I started to get a bit disillusioned with rheumatology, despite enormous progress in the field, where we can treat people spectacularly better than 20 years ago, really essentially cure people, almost cure people with their diseases. There was still a lot of suffering, and that we weren't really addressing in medicine the psychosocial aspects of well-being, disease. And I became more interested in chronic pain in particular, which is one of the most complex areas, really, and an area that people don't like to get involved in, particularly where patients really suffer a lot and don't have much support. And I was also getting more interested in Buddhism and in yoga, and I decided to train as a yoga teacher, not with the intention of teaching necessarily, but just because I was interested in the yogic philosophy and the mind-body dualism, non-dualism. And so I think I find myself at a bit of a crossroads in my career again, because I've ended up being much more of a psychologist or psychiatrist in my relates. I'm much more interested in the mind-body interface than in cytokines and immunology. And COVID has raised the profile of this kind of interface, psychosomatic aspect of medicine. Become interested in trauma, particularly in early childhood, the effects of that on long-term health and well-being, and that's led me to an interest in psychedelics. And really, it feels like I've come full circle, that I'm dealing with people who have malfunctioning brains, really, and that that initial interest in psychology, wherever that came from, was my path. So, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for telling us a little bit about what you've done today, and obviously we'll come back to some of those themes. So our next introduction is with Francine. So Francine, I'll let you take over now from these.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me loud and clear?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you very much for welcoming me here to the presentation this evening. I'm sorry it's remote, but I do have a very non-linear career, and traveling is one of those factors that's always been part of it. Because I've done so much, I would say, over the past 25 years, I was going to focus on the 6 areas that have kind of been constants in my career. And that was an easy way of explaining it to you. And I think you can see the slide that I've put up there as well on the screen now. I can't see that, but I'm sure you can see this. The first factor and the first constant in my career has been a focus on gender equality and combating discrimination in different forms. It's already started at Queen's. I studied English and French from 92 to 96, and I was most annoyed that there were no French women writers on the canon at that time. And so I was actually invited to be one of the first students to do a Master of Studies in women's studies in 1996 to 1997, when thankfully I was able to study women writers. And I think now that course has over 100 students. At my era, it was about 10 of us in the first year. So that was really exciting for me. And then carrying on with gender equality, I had a scholarship to go to France and compare 19th century French and English women writers in Strasbourg University. But at that time, that subject didn't really exist. And so I managed to get through my DEA and do the studies, but I actually didn't go on to do the doctorate. And I've seen a huge change in France as well. Nowadays, you can do that type of gender studies work, and that's fantastic. So we fast forward to 2007. I was working already within the Council of Europe for some time in Strasbourg in a European film fund called Eurimage. And I noticed that there was a lack of women both on screen and off screen in the film industry. So for about 6 years, I surreptitiously mined data from the Eurimage Film Fund. And I decided after that time to take a 2-year sabbatical and set up the European Women's Audiovisual Network. And you can see a photo on the corner, and you'll see me with sunglasses in Cannes Film Festival. And also I'm next to Jane Campion, Isabel Diocampo and Paula Ortiz, and they have all been involved with the European Women's Audiovisual Network. And this network did a lot of work on empowering women through training courses. We did a lot of lobbying work as well. The most important was creating a networking space, like you have tonight as well, networking together. And we also came up with a research project, Where Are the Female Directors in European Films, which was quite groundbreaking and allowed us to show that there was a real problem. Then I went back to the Eurimage Film Fund in 2014, and there I ran the Gender Equality Working Group with National Film Fund representatives. And there were many highlights of the work that I was doing there for quite a while. But the biggest one was that I saw a transposition of the work that I did in grassroots activism in my association. And we were able to have a recommendation by the Council of Europe on gender equality in the audiovisual sector. And it specifically referred to the European Women's Audiovisual Network research project. So that was a real piece of satisfaction for me to see that my grassroots work had been able to bring about change in soft law at pan-European level. Fast forward to 2021, and I'm now Deputy Executive Secretary of an enlarged partial agreement on sport, quite a mouthful of a title, if ever there was one. It's also part of the Council of Europe. And you can see a couple more photos at the top with groups of women, especially at the 17th Council of Europe Conference of Ministers responsible for sport. For those of you not working in sport, it really is quite a bastion of misogyny still. There's a lot of work to do in the sports sector. And I'm particularly proud because at the 17th Conference of Ministers responsible for sport, with 54 ministers held in Turkey, we managed to have gender equality on the agenda. So that was a big plus. So that's my first constant and the one I've spoken the most about tonight, gender equality and combating discrimination. And it really has motivated me throughout my career. The second constant is living between two places. I can't bear to be in one spot for too long. So I live between France, and you can see a photo of Strasbourg on the slide. And I also live in Spain. I have a home in Spain. You can see me teaching Pilates on the beach. I love having the choice of two countries to live between. It means I have to have a very good agenda and timeline. I generally find that Spain is my place of reflection for thinking, and Strasbourg is very politically exciting, especially at pan-European level. And it literally means a crossroads, Strasbourg. The third constant, and I would dare I say it, the best thing about attending Queen's was that I met my wonderful husband, Nicholas Raveney, at Queen's College. You can see us at the bottom of the screen with our two dogs. And this is a fun event at Farm Dog Cannes Film Festival. So they have an actual prize for the best dog actor, and we just stand in the audience every year and take our dogs. So Nicholas has been my cheerleader all these years, and we've worked very well as a team. He's the exact polar opposite of me and likes to stay in the same job and not travel too much. My fourth constant is that I've constantly oscillated between working in an institutional setting. It might be the World Health Organization in publishing, the Council of Europe, but then I also like to work independently. So I'm a qualified Pilates teacher, and I'm very interested to hear about the yoga teaching, because for me, Pilates is really important. It's about inner strength as well. But I also do things like reading scripts for Netflix or teaching film finance in Spain. I like the variety that I can have, having a more institutional career and then an independent career. And then the other thing which I absolutely love, which you might have noticed because I love to hog the microphone, is I love public speaking. So my highlight is the top of that middle photo there, where in front of the 54 ministers of sport, I had the microphone and I was beamed on all the screens, and that was really great. I even teach public speaking, mainly to Spanish film people. And the final constant for me is I always try and stay as positive as possible. Life isn't always easy, but I try to be very positive in the way that I approach everything I do. I think that kindness is really important. So in a way, although my career might be considered non-linear, it's more like a big series of building blocks that coexist. And I think the reason why I do so many different things is I'm someone who gets bored easily. So I was going to quote a poem that I like from a male poet. It's rather a sexist poem, and when you analyze it deeply, you might want to reread it. It's John Donne's Elegy 3, Change, and the quote is, "Change is a nursery of joy, life, and eternity." And in my case, change has been something that's been very beneficial. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Francine. That was really interesting, and actually it's already great to see some kind of common themes coming through, sort of from what you both started doing academically through to kind of what you've then discovered in your spare time, and you've actually discovered a common interest here. But before we delve into this further, I think I'd really like Joanne for you to share a bit about yourself as well.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting me. I have definitely had a non-linear career, and until I was asked to speak, I wasn't sure that was a positive thing. So it's actually allowed me to reframe it, start thinking, oh, maybe it's a good thing. If someone had told me at Queen's at 50, I turned 50 in October, I'd be an artist living in Scotland running a business, I think I'd have thought there'd been this. Too long. Like lots of you, I imagine I've faced many challenges over my career in the last 30 years. My priorities have changed, and they definitely continue to change. Right now, I'm in my 50th year, and I feel like I've found a real balance that works for me. And I feel like I've been searching for that for 3 decades. So it's great to have finally found a balance. My company is called The Little Art School, and we're celebrating our 10th year this year, after what's been a roller coaster of survival through the pandemic, like lots of other businesses. But right now, we're really settled on a path to growth. We've got a team of 30 people, and every day, every single one of my working days, it's entirely different. Our why as a team is really simple. We build self-esteem, and we do it by teaching our unique drawing and painting course to children in studios and online to adults across Britain and actually now globally. We've also got 2 charities, the Dementia Arts Trust and the Little Art Stars, working at all sides of demographics. And we here in both our charities, we use art to really spread joy and to create connections with some of the most vulnerable members of our community. I'm immensely proud of what we do, but it's a really, really long way from where I started. I studied history at Queen's, and I chose history because I loved it. And 30 years on, I still am as passionately fascinated by history as I was, although the Anglo-Saxons definitely haven't got any more interesting over time. I met in 1995, had absolutely no idea what I wanted to be. I went to an inner city comprehensive where more people went to prison than university. Nobody in my family had ever been to university. I genuinely believed that getting into Oxford was it. I gave no further thought to anything beyond that. That was my ambition. I had no, I want to be at. And I have 3 of my very dearest friends here this evening. They know that. I never really said I want to be a, I didn't know what I wanted to do. 2 weeks after the Commem Ball, right at the end of the year, at the time at Queen's, I flew out to Japan and started working in Fukushima, which no one had heard of till the tsunami. And I worked as part of the JET program for a year. I've not got many regrets in my life, but definitely one of them is not staying longer in Japan. The JET programme is an amazing programme. If you know anybody who's leaving university looking for something to do, I really highly recommend it. I came back after a year because I was desperate to start my amazing career. I still had no idea what I was going to do. To the great surprise of everybody, including myself, to be honest, I joined the Royal Air Force in 1997. And it was an odd thing to do, wasn't it? It really was. But in my defence, 1997 was a really different era from now. So it was Robin Cook, Tony Blair. It felt like this post-Cold War, a whole brave new world. There was this compassionate foreign policy. And the British Armed Forces at the time were fighting for justice in Sierra Leone. They were protecting the vulnerable in Bosnia. This post-Cold War world of the late 1990s was, I don't know anybody who's around at the time would agree with me, it felt like a very optimistic place, would you say? Yeah. It really felt very different from what came next. I served as an intelligence officer in the Royal Air Force, so for obvious reasons. I'm not going to go into any details of that. 9/11 changed everything, and it definitely changed not just the world, but certainly the nature of my job. For me, whether I wanted to serve in Iraq or Afghanistan, which I very firmly didn't, was irrelevant because at that point I broke my back and I was medically discharged. Got so much from the Royal Air Force. And by the age of 30, I was actually officially a war pensioner, and I had 2 babies and a really, really, really sore back. My 30s saw my priorities shift completely, and it all became about working around my family. Now, this definitely hadn't been part of my ambitious feminist career aspiration at 25. But now I do look back on my 30s actually as a huge gift, because trite as it sounds, with 2 of my children at university now, they do grow up very, very, very fast. But going back to having just left the Air Force, I had 2 children under 2, and I completed a master's in museum and gallery studies at Southampton University. Finally, I felt like I've got a really realistic plan, a proper plan now. It all went really well. The masters went brilliantly. I was offered a fully funded PhD at Southampton, teaching undergraduates as well, and a consultancy with Hampshire County Museum Service. It's great. And then my husband's job moved to Scotland, and we all had to move with it. And at the time, it felt like an utter and absolute personal disaster. Hetty, you didn't even know where that part of Scotland was. It was like, where was I moving to? The west coast of Scotland. And this linear path I'd planned in the museum and galleries world, using my history degree, had all been thrown off course. But bizarrely, it actually led to the jolliest job I've ever had. And I think everyone should have one really jolly job. While I was writing my MA dissertation, I wrote a piece for a magazine about visiting museums with preschool children. And the magazine company liked the way that I wrote so much, they offered me a job. And I worked as a freelance journalist, as one of their lead journalists for several years. And in the end, I managed to do this. I found a way of writing where I wrote these little inserts called Let's Go with the Kids. So I was like, let's go to the Isle of Wight or the Lake District or wherever. And I managed to get free stays in 5-star hotels all over the country, and really lovely restaurants and 3 day trips. Anyway, my kids loved it. They thought it was brilliant. But unfortunately, all good things end. And when I was expecting my 4th child, when he came along, no hotels, even really, really posh hotels, are interested in trying to provide a family room for 4 kids, because it doesn't work. So 12 years ago now, with 4 children under 11, I started to sell my paintings. I didn't paint when I was at university. In fact, I started to paint when I broke my back. I saw a sign for a course in a village hall, and it was called Drawing and Painting for Those Who Think They Can't. It's just a handwritten pavement. I couldn't paint, but I had this real memory of being a child and loving drawing and loving painting. And when I was 14, my art teacher told me I was rubbish, and I stopped drawing and painting, and I didn't have any enjoyment. But that first class, which is well over 20 years ago now, I found this real sense of peace, and which is what I was going to talk to you about, Catherine. It was a freedom from pain, because when you're focusing on something, and something particularly that's creative, you can actually really lose yourself into it. So I spent 10 years, whilst I was doing the journalism and other things, I spent 10 years reading about how to draw and paint and going to the odd class and practicing and making loads and loads of mistakes, every mistake in the book. But eventually I got better. And when I stopped working as a journalist, I started selling my paintings. I got my work in galleries, I was selling commissions. I decided I'd paint portraits, because portraits are really, really hard. So if you can do portraits, you can pretty much paint everything. And then this really weird thing happened, not part of a plan. It was 10 years ago. I volunteered at my eldest daughter's class to teach the kids how to draw. And I had this real light bulb moment. And I realised you really could teach absolutely anyone how to draw and paint. So I started to write a course, which begins with learning to draw a straight line, how we start teaching people. And you finish the course by painting Vermeer's girl with the pearl earring in oil. Over the last 10 years, we have taught thousands of people, young and old, and continue to do so. And it has brought great joy. I don't run this on my own. I've got a big team, and I have an amazing business partner who did follow a really linear corporate path until she turned 42. And actually, I think some days when she's working with me, she really wishes back on that, because it's our world is so unpredictable. Now, I really feel like I have worked out what I want to do when I'm grown up. I'm grown up, I'm 50, so I'm doing what I wanted to do. But I couldn't have put it into words or articulated it, certainly when I left Queen's. I'm a social entrepreneur, the work that we do with our charities, and with what I'm doing with the business and the other little business ideas that I've still got that I want to come. I couldn't have articulated that as a graduate, and it was this non-linear path that brought me round to it. So that's mine.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Well, it's so interesting to hear about these three really very different and all very varied careers. I think just to pick up on some of the themes that have come through, obviously there are plenty, and I'm sure you'll have some questions also to add on your side. I think the first one is, and you know, this is something that perhaps I've also come across myself, is obviously you've all taken leaps in different directions. I wondered if you could kind of talk about how you've decided to take that leap and take a risk at a particular point, and what the turning point has been. So I don't know if there's one of you that'd like to perhaps address this first.
I never really gave them much. I mean, joining the Air Force was a real leap, and it was only I remember being in the bus going down way to swear your oath. I did say to someone, "You can't." And they said, "No, I want to sign up for," and I said, and it was a real, and after that, it should have taught me that you can't really, you should think before you do things like that. When I started the company, then I didn't, I just left and then spent 5 years in. But, I think you probably haven't, but Francine and Catherine probably have more informed choice.
I think the big leap obviously was going back to university, and it really did feel like a big decision at the time, and people kept on telling me, you know, you're very young, and it didn't feel like it at the time. And of course, you know, I started at the age of 25. I was very young, and looking back at it, I don't know why I agonised so much about it. I think these days it would be a much bigger decision, because it would be a massive financial commitment, and it wasn't for me at the time. You didn't have to pay full fees. So it would be a very different decision now, but also committing to 5 further years of study. But I think I felt, you know, someone said to me, you regret the things that you don't do, and that really rang true for me. And I thought, well, I can always drop out if it's not turning out to be the right thing, but if I don't do it, I'll never know.
Great, thank you. And Francine, is there anything you'd like to add on your side?
Yes, definitely. I think the biggest risk that I took was actually when I set up the European Women's Audiovisual Network 10 years ago, because I left the Eurimage job. I left, a nice paid job, but also I sold, which is what you should never do. You should always fundraise for a project. You should never put your own assets in, which is what I did. So I sold a flat, and I totally invested in this project night and day and fundraised for it. And I worked so hard on it. And really, I didn't know where it was going to go, the European Women's Audiovisual Network. We didn't know what would happen. I think the happiest moment was when I fundraised the first 17,000 euros from the Swedish Film Institute. But I was literally flying around Europe to different film funds, knocking on doors and fundraising. And now, it was so great for me in Berlin at the film festival last week on Monday. We did a 10-year recap, or I did a 10-year recap of the network. And I explained about the differences. And of course, we set up the network before kind of Me Too became known and an issue. So it was really before that change in the curve, but it had to be done. I just knew in my heart that the film industry was really not a place that was suitable, and especially because it wasn't showing diversity of content. So it was more of a calling, if you like. So my poor husband has to follow these callings I have from time to time when I decide to change tack. Pretty much the same way when I took a more recent sabbatical to become a Pilates instructor as well. I just suddenly changed tack, took a few months off work and qualified to become a Pilates instructor. But I knew it was the right thing to do at the right time. So it's sort of instinctive.
Great, thank you. And that actually leads quite nicely to my next question, which is more around, you've mentioned obviously maybe you didn't feel at the time you took such a big financial risk when going back to university. Obviously, there would have been maybe other concerns. You've mentioned Francine, your partner, and so on. So I just wanted to know, kind of, bearing all of this in mind, do you think that there are different points in your life where some of these things are easier to do, and in particular, maybe as a woman, whether the fact of being a woman has perhaps impacted when you've decided to make those decisions? I don't know if one of you wants to address that.
I don't want to go first again.
I can go first if you want. I don't want to hog the panel from distance, but I can do it. Look, when I started at Queen's, I think that I was one of the poorest students who went to Queen's. I mean, everyone might consider themselves, but I was really very poor at Queen's. I remember the final year, I couldn't afford to pay for the food, so I was banned from the dining hall for the last term of my final year because I couldn't afford to pay for the food. So just to say, I came from quite a poor background, and I think that means that I've never been frightened to go back to a certain sense of poverty at certain times in my life. So I've taken that risk at different times. I think now at this point in time, age 49, I'm less inclined to give up the nice lifestyle that I've built up. But in the past, I was definitely capable of doing that. And I think in terms of women's lives, we also make decisions about how we want to live our lives. And a decision that I took, which I think does have an impact, was that I knew from a very early age I didn't want to have a family. Not everyone wants that choice, but it was a choice of mine. And so I knew that I didn't have children who would rely on me financially either. So that gave a bit of freedom there. So that was just, I think it's worth mentioning that factor.
Yeah, and for me, it was quite different in that I did know that I wanted a family, and a big family. My husband made me stop at 4. And I think I'd still be carrying on about one of those mad women in a Daily Mail article. And also, but I wasn't sure. I do remember talking about it at Queen's, about saying, I really want a big family, but I'm going to totally have a career as well. Because I think we were there in the mid-90s with that sort of Nicola Paulitz, who's probably so far in history now, but, this banker that had 7 children. And it's like, I'm just going to have a nanny. And then I held my first baby and thought, I literally could barely hand her over to my husband, never mind to anybody else. And it was funny coming here because I was thinking about that, like there's still a little part, I don't know whether it's women of our generation, where ashamed is the wrong word, but I feel like it's almost disloyal to the feminist cause to really eulogize and say how wonderful it is to be a mum for me. Not for everybody, but for me, it has been amazing. I absolutely love it. I've loved my career, but I love that too. So that has been the biggest thought all the way through this. I've got 4 kids ranging from 12 to 21 right now. The youngest was 3 and the oldest was 11 when I started the business. So I started the business because I wanted to be in a job where I could always go to the school plays and I could always be part of their lives, that I never had to worry about asking a boss or pretending to be ill because they were sick. We built our office, everybody in my team has kids, and in the early days, our office was half desks and it was half play equipment. And we basically had kids in there the whole time. So we were trying to run a business and sort of set it up saying that we believe that there's so many women out there with huge skill sets who are really struggling to find flexible work opportunities so that they can continue to be part of their children's lives. I know men feel the same, but they can go and sort it out themselves. I figured out how it was going to work for me and for my colleagues, my cohort, and that's what we did. But that, not necessarily being a woman, but being a parent, and the way that I felt about my kids had a huge impact on how I had the timing of what I've done with.
Thank you. Catherine, is there anything you'd like to add to this on your side?
I mean, it's not really been a major factor for me. I didn't make a decision to have kids or not to have kids. I didn't really make a decision to have a career, really. I think that's given me a degree of flexibility. I don't particularly have a massive amount of ambition for a fantastic lifestyle or to have a successful career. I think I just want to believe in what I do and enjoy it. And I'm very glad that I have the freedom really to do what I want at the moment, which feels very good.
Great, well, that's really inspiring to hear. And actually, at this point, I wanted to ask if you also had questions on your side, because obviously we've been having this discussion. I'm sure some thoughts have been coming to you, so please do not hesitate and ask. Someone has to be the first.
Who've been the people that have helped you in terms of, like, you know, people who stand out in your career, who've given you that helping hand when you've needed one, or have given you the push, or have inspired you, you know, and how do you know that they're going to be that person straight away, or, you know, is it often quite surprising?
For me, as soon as you started that question, I know exactly what I wanted to say. It's about my parents. As I was saying, I just turned 50, but I've never felt under any pressure to follow a career path because my parents did this bonkers thing when I was at Queen's. So I was second year at Queen's, and my mum and dad decided to go to university for the first time. So they were first years, not, my God, at Oxford. I mean, although my dad came down a lot. My dad studied history, the same as me. So anybody who knew my dad after he went on to do a PhD at Oxford, actually. And people would say, did you do history because of your dad? I was like, no. And my mum did nursing. So they started their degrees in their late 40s. That wasn't them going back to university. My dad was a Royal Marine, and my mum was a hairdresser. They went to university for the first time, and then they had these really fulfilling careers, which they really began at 50. At my age now, where loads of my friends are constantly talking about retirement. I mean, it's just, they'd not begun, and they had really fulfilling 15-year careers. So I've always felt like you could start something at any point. I still think I've got at least 2 careers left in me.
I feel the same, actually. I think people who've inspired me or helped me. So I think I've I've recently met them actually. I've just been at a conference today on functional neurological disorders, and I think I've just met the team of people that are inspiring and that I want to work with, and that's great. Apart from that, I'd say the people that have inspired me the most have been people in the music and arts world, and in yoga and Buddhist world actually, and those are the people that have had the biggest impact on me in other areas, I suppose, not directly in my career.
So maybe I'll jump in. The person who inspired me the most definitely was a lady called Alison Finch. She was a professor at Merton College, and she believed in me. She really believed in me. So for me, Alison Finch's support was really crucial because, you know, I found it quite difficult coming to Queen's. I didn't find Queen's an easy place to study personally. And I had all of these opinions which didn't really fit into I would say, the general atmosphere in Queen's when I was there as well. I was a feminist already at 18 and I wanted to see things differently. And I felt like Alison Finch believed in me. And that belief really has helped me. And then I would say as well, and it's not to overstress it, I don't believe that you need to find a partner who believes in you to make the difference in your life. But I've been really blessed in having someone who's believed in me from the start, from age 18. So I met Nick when I was 18. I made him wait for 4 years before even considering dating him. He's been really the biggest supporter. And before I even do the presentation, before we did this presentation, to give you an example, we practiced presentations together, his own, mine, and everything. We worked like a team. And I think that really is very fortunate. And then when I'd come up with crazy ideas and say, let's do this, let's sell everything, let's start afresh, and he'll go, what? And I just say, it's going to be a good thing. And then he goes along with it. And I think I'm really lucky to have that relationship. I'm not so sure how many men could stand it, or partners.
Great, thank you. Another question from someone? Everyone's very quiet. Apparently, all the questions have been answered.
I'll ask one. I'm conscious that we want to move in networking as well. Something you said, Joanne, about working as a jet. My brother did the same for 3 years, and that really transformed his life. But also for me, I went to work in Luxembourg for 15 months, and that it's not a wildly different culture, but that immersion in a different place and going out of the comfort zone. Just interested in your experiences, all of you, in working in a different manner, perhaps relocating, taking that leap of faith, and how that then informed your later decisions.
Yeah, does Scotland count? Because I really, your brother was so sensible staying for 3 years. I think that it's something that Catherine mentioned earlier about this idea of you think you're old at 25, and I was 23 when I left Japan, and I really felt like everyone was getting ahead. Like everybody's getting these grown-up jobs, and they're all really getting ahead. And I really should. I look back now and think, oh my God, you fool! It was such a great life, such a great lifestyle. It's an amazing country to live in. I should totally stay longer, but moving to Scotland was really, I say it jokingly, but actually we were living on the south coast of England in the sort of town that looked like it should be in Miss Marple, where it was like, having come from a sort of working class Lancashire family, I felt like I'd made it. I was in Farrow and Moorland, practically a little basket on my shoulder, on my arm, like, morning, as I went to the market. And I totally felt like, this is it, this is why I went, I've made it, I'm middle class. And then we moved to Scotland, and I was like, oh, no, back we go. And I was on the west coast of Scotland, and actually in an area of incredibly high socioeconomic deprivation. And I know there's socioeconomic deprivation everywhere. And I've lived in lots with the Air Force. I lived in a lot of parts of the UK, but I've not really seen anything quite like I see on the west coast of Scotland. And it felt really like, oh, this is not where I want to be. This is not my place. I'm 50, fast forward 15 years, we work in probably the most deprived school in the area. And I go in and I see these kids and see the difference that we're making to them, children who literally have no chance here. You know, mum and dad are in prison, or they're on drugs, or there are lots of kids. We're working with so many refugees at the moment, and so many children that desperately need something. And I just feel now so glad we did it, that we did this move, that it was forced back into reality from my variable world, and I feel much more comfortable there now. So it was like that shift, sometimes a shift to a different place, even though it doesn't seem as dramatic as somewhere in Europe or Japan. Actually, different parts of the UK are.
Yeah, I mean, when in medicine you have time during a training to do a medical elective, and people choose different areas of the world or different areas of medicine to go and do it. And I was very keen to go somewhere that was completely different, and to experience a very different kind of medicine. And I chose to go to Nepal, and not to a very, I was in a very non-touristy area of Nepal. There were no tourists, and it was a real privilege actually to have that experience, and it stayed with me very strongly, walking through the foothills of the Himalayas and things, and staying on the floor in people's houses, you know, literally lying on the wooden floor, having to go to bed at 5 or 6 in the evening when the sun went down, no heating, no hot water, no running water sometimes, and eating twice a day dal bhat, which is lentils and rice, which in fact is probably my favourite food, so fantastic. And learning Nepalese during the time that I was there. So that was a pretty amazing experience. And then I think through my work, I feel like I work with a very different, well, I work with all sorts of people. I work with everyone. You know, in medicine, you meet everyone from everywhere, and particularly in London, and particularly in King's catchment area, I think. So that again gives me a very different view of life and different cultures and different people, which also feels like a massive privilege.
Thank you. Francine, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Really quickly, actually working in the Council of Europe in Strasbourg. Now, I've got to say, at the moment, I'm in a brilliant team. It's actually all women, which was intentional, but the team is fantastic, multicultural, very diverse, a really great working environment. But in general, as a general rule, I think we can say Council of Europe, the European Union, these are institutions where backstabbing is just part of, it's like working in politics, I guess, in the UK as well. So the backstabbing is pretty terrible. And you have to constantly watch your back for the knives that are being stabbed into you while you're not looking. So it's a tough, nasty environment, and you have to really stick with it. So I would say that's been the toughest working environment. But as I said, right now I'm in a great spot with great team.
Great, thank you. So I think just in terms of timing, probably worth wrapping up the sort of more formal part of the evening, just so everyone has a chance to chat and also to meet our speakers. So thank you very much. And I think, Wendy, you wanted to say a few words.
Yes, I do. Thank you so much, panel. It's been a really enjoyable, fascinating, quite exhausting evening, actually. I'm just thinking what the three of you have managed to crack in. And I mean, truly, I mean this sincerely, it's been very inspiring, very reassuring to listen to you all. What struck me as a couple of things is that none of you identify a faux pas. Whenever the change has happened, you've made the most of it. You've been open to it, you've embraced it. And I think there's a lesson in there for all of us, whether the change has been of your own making or not. It's something that you can take forward, which is great. And also, as Joanne said, who knew that having a non-linear career path was a positive thing? And it quite clearly is, because it's enabled everybody to, I think all three of you at your heart have an instinct, and that you've been driven by your instinct, and whether you think you've gone circular or meandering or you're still going up, whatever it is, you've been true to yourselves as opposed to trying to be something that you're not, even if you tried and failed or never quite got there. So yeah, much to learn, whatever age and stage you're at. And speaking to someone who has now retired, I'm heartened to think I've got a good couple more careers in me yet, because that's actually quite a significant career change, is to stop doing paid work for a bit and see what happens. So thank you very much indeed for sharing your stories with us, and thank you to Laurianne for chairing. I think what it shows is the great richness that we have within the college, and with RSM colleagues as well, who I know are here tonight. You never get a dull conversation, somebody told me, at college, and you certainly don't. And we've had 3 very exciting stories tonight. Thank you. But what we're trying to do with the Queen's Women's Network, as you probably know, is to try and facilitate those connections, so you can hear, be inspired by other people, just see what other people have done, where that's taken them, and maybe touch base with people who look as if they've done similar things to you, or who you'd like to hear more about. I would encourage you, therefore, all, if you can, if you haven't already, to join the LinkedIn group. That's our main means of trying to make those connections, including with current students. And we've been speaking with the JCR and MCR women's reps, and they're desperate to contact people who've maybe done what they're looking at 10 years ahead or 20 years ahead, and hear those stories. So if you could even encourage your friendship groups to join the network as well. Obviously, the richness of the group is what's going to give it its positivity and its benefit. And as I would always say, if anybody's interested in joining the network committee or helping in any way, or would like to know more about it, Alicia, I hope you're here tonight, because I'd love to have a conversation with you. Please do contact me by the email address that's on the webpage. Speak to any of us who are here tonight from the committee. I think could even contact you, Christine, could put us in touch. But we're also very lucky at Queen's to have such a rich resource, and we need to build it and tap into it. So thank you again very much, ladies, tonight. It's been super. I've really enjoyed hearing all about it, and thank you.